Have you ever had that gut feeling that someone was trying to lure you into a trap right in the middle of a dark storm? Well, sit back because you're about to hear why you should always trust that instinct. Welcome back to 3 True Rainy Night Horror Stories with rain sounds. And if you're enjoying the atmosphere, smash that like button for me. It really helps the channel. Now, let's get into the first story of the night. I used to work the graveyard shift at a medium-sized hotel in my town. My main responsibility was standing behind the front desk and helping anyone who needed to check in or out late at night. Honestly, the lobby was usually a ghost town after midnight. Most people who came in just headed straight for the elevators, so I spent the vast majority of my shift just staring at the automatic glass doors, waiting for something to happen. You get used to the occasional angry guest complaining about a heater or someone acting a bit strange, but there was one particular night that I'll never forget. It started out like any other boring shift, but the weather outside was absolutely miserable. But here is where things started to get a little bit creepy. A massive thunderstorm was hammering the building, and usually when the weather is that bad, nobody even thinks about leaving their room or coming inside from the street. I was scrolling on my phone to pass the time when a man suddenly appeared at the entrance. He walked through the first set of sliding doors but stopped in that small area before the second set. He just stood there, gazing through the glass and scanning the lobby like he was looking for something specific. For a second, we made direct eye contact. It was incredibly awkward. He suddenly started patting his pockets like he'd lost something and then turned around, walking right back out into the rain. I've worked in hotels long enough to see plenty of weirdos, so I didn't think much of it. I just figured he'd forgotten his keys and had to run back to his car. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss another story. Now, this is where the situation took a very strange turn. About 5 minutes after the man left, the phone on my desk started ringing. I looked at the caller ID and saw it was an outside line, not a guest from a room. I answered with my standard greeting asking how I could help. A man's voice came through the line, claiming he was parked in the front lot and needed help bringing his luggage inside because of the storm. I told him our bellmen had all gone home at 9 p.m. and there was nobody available to help. He didn't take no for an answer, though. He kept insisting, telling me he just had one small suitcase and asking if I could personally come out to the parking lot to help him. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because his request made no sense. I told him that if he just drove his car up to the front awning, he'd be out of the rain and I could help him from there. There was a moment where I just stood my ground, but wait until you hear the bizarre excuse he gave me for not moving his car. I told him again that he had to pull up to the front awning if he wanted my help, but this time he had a new story. He claimed he'd already taken all his heavy luggage out and didn't want to go through the trouble of putting it back in just to move the vehicle. I was already getting a creepy vibe from this guy, but that response made me absolutely certain that something was seriously wrong. I asked if he even had a room booked, making it clear that I needed to check him in before I could assist him any further. He got angry immediately, acting as if I had personally offended him just by asking for his information. He started demanding that I come outside right then and help him before he checked in, complaining that his bags were getting soaked in the rain. At this point, I'd had enough of his weird behavior. I told him he shouldn't have left his bags out in a storm to begin with, and if he refused to check in, I was going to have to ask him to leave. He just flipped me the middle finger and stormed out. If this story is giving you the chills already, smash that like button. Now here is where it gets even creepier. He didn't come back for the rest of the night, and when the morning shift arrived, I told them all about him. As far as I know, he never actually checked in. It totally freaked me out realizing he was just some random stranger trying to lure me out to his car in the middle of a stormy night. I don't usually take long road trips. I'd much rather take a plane if I have to go anywhere far. But because of a sudden funeral for a family member, I had to make a 10-hour drive to my cousin's house. I wasn't entirely sure how long I'd be away from home, so I packed enough clothes and supplies to last me at least a week and started my drive the next morning around 10 a.m. It had probably been 5 or 6 years since I'd driven a distance like that, but I was still pretty confident. I really thought I could make it all the way there in a single day without needing to stop at a hotel. But here is the crazy part. A couple of hours into the drive, massive storm clouds started to form way out ahead of me. An hour later, I was right in the thick of it, driving through heavy rain and thunder that seemed to shake the whole car. The roads were incredibly long, stretching through wide open fields and thick forest. Since parts of the road were in a valley, all the rainwater flowed right onto the pavement because there was basically no drainage system to handle it. I had to slow down drastically to make sure I didn't slide off the road or get caught in a flooded section. At one point, I reached a spot where I couldn't even cross because the path was completely underwater. I couldn't risk my car breaking down or getting stuck in the middle of nowhere. Wait until you hear what was lurking right outside my car window while I was trying to get some sleep in that creepy parking lot. The vibe of the place was honestly pretty unsettling, so I made sure to double-check that all my doors were locked tight. I took a good few minutes to scan the area before I finally decided to lean my seat back and close my eyes for a bit. If you're enjoying the story so far, definitely smash that like button for me. Looking back, I know it sounds like a terrible idea, and I probably should have known better than to stay there, but it was getting really late and the rain was absolutely pouring. At the time, I wasn't really worried about anything bad happening. Plus, it felt a lot safer than just pulling over on some random empty road where I'd be totally stuck if I needed help. But here's the crazy part. The storm was only getting started. After about 10 minutes of listening to the heavy rhythm of the rain hitting the roof, I finally drifted off. When I finally opened my eyes again, the first thing I noticed was that the thunder and lightning had become way more intense. I looked out the window and realized the entire parking lot was much darker than it had been when I first arrived. But then, off in the distance, I caught sight of a shadow moving toward my car. I just sat there staring at the figure, desperately hoping they'd turn a corner or head toward a building. But as they kept walking, it became terrifyingly clear that they were coming straight for me. The rain made it really hard to see anything clearly, but once they got within 20 feet, I could tell it was a man. I started to feel a real sense of dread, especially because it was a total downpour and this guy didn't seem to care about the weather at all. By the way, if you love these kinds of stories, hit subscribe and tap that bell so you don't miss the next one. I could see that he wasn't carrying anything in his hands, which gave me a little bit of confidence. I figured he couldn't just smash his way into the car without a tool. But once he was only a few feet away, he didn't go for the driver's side. Instead, he walked right up to the back door. Now this is where it gets really interesting. He didn't even try to pull the handle or break the glass. Instead, he just put both of his hands flat against the door and started pushing. He was leaning into it like he was trying to physically push my entire car across the lot. I had no idea what was going through his head, but the fact that he was trying to shove a whole vehicle told me this guy was completely out of his mind. I quickly shoved my key into the ignition and cranked the engine. I flipped on my headlights and everything else I could, trying to signal to this guy that I was inside and awake, but he didn't even flinch. But you won't believe what happens next. He just kept pushing as if his life depended on moving that car. I'd finally had enough of this nightmare. I shifted into reverse and slowly started backing out of the spot. The man actually followed the car for a few steps, keeping his hands pressed against the metal before he finally let go. He just stood there in the rain, watching me as I pulled away and headed for the exit. He eventually turned around and started walking back the same way he'd come. I didn't stop once until I finally reached my cousin's house. To give you some context, I live in Washington State. Back when all of this went down, I was living with my parents in our small, remote house out in the woods. Now, here's where things get really intense. We were about 20 minutes away from the closest town, and our nearest neighbors were at least half a mile away in either direction. That kind of setup isn't really unusual around here, since most of the state is just a massive forest landscape filled with tiny towns and only a few big cities. I'd grown up in that house my entire life, so I was used to how quiet it was. But one specific incident that happened when I was 14 made me absolutely terrified of where we lived. It was spring break and we had to cancel a trip to Florida because of my dad's work. To make it up to me, we went to a water park on Sunday. We were there for about 5 hours before a massive storm cloud headed our way. By the time we got home, the storm had completely opened up on us. The rain was coming down in absolute sheets, with thunder shaking the entire house and lightning lighting up the dark sky every few seconds. But as we pulled into our driveway, things started to get really weird. We immediately noticed that our garage door was wide open. My dad just shrugged it off at first, assuming he'd simply forgotten to close it before we left, or maybe the safety sensor had been tripped by a leaf on the way down. My mom, however, was dead certain that she saw it close all the way when we pulled out earlier that day. It felt a little bit off, but there didn't seem to be anything else out of place, so we all climbed out of the car and headed inside. Mom hit the wall button to close the garage, and it slid down perfectly without any issues at all. My parents both headed straight for the living room couch to turn on the TV and relax, while I started making my way upstairs to my bedroom. Before we get into what was waiting for me up there, if you're enjoying the story so far, smash that like button. It really helps the channel out. The rain was pounding on the roof even harder now, filling the whole house with a heavy, rumbling sound that made the atmosphere feel even more tense. But halfway up the stairs, I froze. I swear I heard something moving around in the hallway right above me. I quickly hurried up the rest of the steps, trying to see if a stray animal had somehow gotten inside, but the hallway was completely empty. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach do a backflip. My bedroom lights were wide open. This was incredibly strange because I knew for a fact that I hadn't even turned them on once today, and I definitely wouldn't have left them burning while we were out at the water park. I stood there in the hall, not really sure what to think. I tried to tell myself that I'd just forgotten about them or that maybe a power surge caused a glitch in the wiring, but I was still pretty spooked. Now, this is where it gets really unsettling. I stood right outside my bedroom door for a long time, just listening. I wanted to make sure it was safe before I actually stepped inside. After a few moments of total silence, I heard it. A very faint, soft, shuffling sound. It was quiet, almost like a small rodent or a rat moving between some old cardboard boxes. I slowly cracked the door open, fully expecting to see a little animal scurrying across the floor. But when I looked inside, I didn't see anything at all. I walked in and shut the door behind me, looking around the room. Everything looked totally normal and untouched. Usually, when an animal gets into a house, they leave some kind of mess behind. But everything was right where I left it. I even got down on my hands and knees to check under the bed and in the corners of the floor, but I didn't see a single sign of anything living in there. If you want to see more creepy stories like this, hit subscribe and tap that bell so you never miss an upload. I sat down on the edge of my bed, just trying to collect my thoughts and figure out why I was so paranoid. But as I sat there in the quiet, a dark shadow suddenly darted across the gap at the bottom of my bedroom door from out in the hallway. My heart stopped. Based on the size and shape of that shadow, it wasn't a pet or a small animal. It was definitely a person standing right outside my door. I stood up instantly, my mind racing with fear. I was basically trapped in my room, and the only way out was to risk running right into whoever was out there. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and sent a quick text to my dad, telling him that someone else was upstairs with me. I saw the message change to read almost immediately, and a second later, I could hear his heavy footsteps quickly coming up the stairs to find me. But you won't believe what happened the moment he reached my door. I stood by the door, terrified that whoever was in the hall was going to jump him. But after a few tense seconds, the door swung open and I saw my dad. He looked at me with a face full of concern, and I quickly whispered to him exactly what I had seen. He could clearly sense the pure terror in my voice, so we both decided to head back down the hall and get downstairs to my mom. But just as we reached the bottom of the steps, a massive, loud thud echoed from the floor above us. It was followed by the sound of heavy, frantic footsteps sprinting down the hallway. We scrambled into the living room, and my dad grabbed a small baseball bat he kept in the corner for protection. But the intruder was incredibly fast. We heard them fly down the stairs, and a split second later, the front door slammed open as they bolted out into the pouring rain. Which part of this would have scared you the most? Drop it in the comments below. We rounded the corner just in time to see the front door wide open, with a shadowy figure disappearing into the distance. My dad immediately dialed 911, but because we lived so far out, it took the police nearly 30 minutes to finally show up. They interviewed my parents and even pulled me aside for a few questions before doing a quick sweep of the property and heading out. But here is the part that still haunts me. They never caught him. The theory was that someone knew we were leaving for vacation that Sunday morning. It is absolutely terrifying to think that the intruder was likely someone we know and trust. If you've ever had a gut feeling about someone, tell me about it in the comments. It really makes you question who your real friends are and how safe you truly are in your own home.